The name of this presentation, Perfuming for Gods, appeared thanks to the questions put by Thibaut, actually. It appeared because of the fact that the incense burners, which I will discuss, were used for some various ways, in some various ways, and for some various reasons. Cultic practices of Pontic cities' habitants of the Hellenistic period included the incense burning in a cup on a stem mounted atop terracottas, but only some of them contain the traces of soot. Therefore, thymiam could be just placed into the open cup for less intensive spread of the smell. Such vast Thymiateria were widely and became suddenly used during this period, and various goddesses were presented in shape of those terracottas with the special kind of cups. Most often they were Aphrodite, a deity from Dionysiac thiasos, and several female types without any attributes. These ritual terracottas were found both in houses and in public sanctuaries of Pontic region. Terracotta female busts supporting cup Thymiateria on their heads, right? Are best known in South Italian regions, on South Italian examples of Hellenistic period. A cup in the shape of a flower, such as a lotus, like this one, was attached to the heads of these busts and was used for burning incense of thymiam during religious practices. Such usual shape of a cup made the researchers of Italian finds call them flower women, just flower women. While some bath Thymiateria appeared at the end of the 5th century, like this one, in Olynthus in Halicarnassus, the greatest number have been found in Italy, where they occurred first at Poseidonia in the 4th century and subsequently spread throughout the southern Italy. They also were taken up by Alexandrian and Eastern Greek coroplasts, who produced them from the 4th to the 2nd centuries BC. Several similar terracottas with cups are known in Pontic region, and let us stop on some of them. It is worth noting that in many ancient Greek centers, bath Thymiateria acquire the most particular form and iconography right in this period, in the Hellenistic period, as we can see in the examples from Gordion, an example from Amisos, and here you can see Isis, for example, having this flower-shaped Thymiateria. Here is Silenus, Dionysus, counterpart, right? Not counterpart. The one who was a part of these mysteries and cults. And there's a hole in the head of these terracottas where the cup, we don't know which shape in this case, where the cup was mounted atop to make the practices, cultic practices. However, the presence of vast Thymiateria at Black Sea sites have been questioned by scholars till recently, who contend that such terracotta types were never produced outside Italy. This contention was encouraged, actually has encouraged me to present to the archaeological community a series of female terracotta busts from Olbia Pontica that served as cup Thymiateria. Unfortunately, they preserved only in fragments, Olbia, right? And some 20 fragments of possibly 17 examples were brought to light during the excavations headed by Slavin over here, headed by Levi in the central temenos headed by Rusaeva as well. Those excavations were provided in 1940s, till the 1960s and in 1970s as well. Now those fragments are housed in the scientific repository of the Institute of Archaeology. And till recently, only 2 of them have ever been illustrated. And not any that are represented by these fragments have ever been described or discussed in the archaeological literature before the 2010s, right? Most of these fragments, as you see, I made some pictures, actually, some reconstructions, right, based on some fragments, which usually we have just fragmented types, but just lots of them in various regions, in various parts of the city and various parts of the Hora. Most of them can be restored to the terracottas of about 19 centimeters height, plus or minus 1 centimeter according to the shape and to the height of the cups. Mold made, they depict either a female dressed in a sleeveless chiton like this, in a stephane, and earrings, which was important, sometimes made by hand. Another type is a female member of Dionysus cult, wearing a chiton, a tenia, of course, wreath, peculiar for Dionysus cult, and corymbs, of course, sometimes called the Ariadne. And one more type is Aphrodite with Erotes on her shoulders, right? This lack of interest, if it's possible to say, to these bust Thymiateria from the Pontic region was the result of infrequent scientific interaction between scholars studying the Pontic region and foreign scholars. Another reason was an inaccurate interpretation of these half figures in the archaeological literature, since the cup Thymiaterion was often interpreted as the headdress, right? Because of this, the generally accepted identification of the 2 best preserved busts, Thymiateria with corymbs, has been that they depict Demeter, since the Thymiaterian cup on the female head has been referred to a kernos of Demeter. This interpretation has been questioned by Irene Romano and later criticized by Pia Bilde, who noted that tenia and corymbs on the female head can only refer to the cult of Dionysus, and therefore Ariadne must be the personage represented. Although the Ariadne interpretation is not quite 100%, because of the woman could be any female involved with the cult of Dionysus. The tenia and corymbs, on the other hand, could indeed refer to the cult of this god. However, it has become obvious today that the roughly made and added details on the heads of these female busts are not headdresses or attributes at all, but rather the functional parts of Thymiateria. Just let me show you this example because of this original shape of this cup. That one was restored later. So here we have only the original part, which was performed like this, which was not quite good. Actually, it was not quite to the close to the original. So we can imagine that usually the Thymiateria look like this. This is just a product of restoration, I would say. This is that it has not been suggested by scholars in the past is due to the fact that the cups do not show traces of burning, as I mentioned before. No soot found there inside. However, bath Thymiateria from Capua in Italy also lack traces of burning, even though in some examples from Posidonia, soot can be observed inside cups. So it is different in different regions, right? It must be asked what could be the motivation behind the application of these small containers on the heads of female busts. If the busts were used solely as votives, then why would they put them atop, right? In In fact, even certain terracotta images that are atypical for Thymiateria were altered by hand in order to have this Thymiaterian cup on the head. The need for such a form as a figurative terracotta had to be driven by corresponding religious requirements, in which the depiction of a female could serve as a vessel for a small amount of some substance used during the cult practice. Taking into consideration the Greek parallels, the suggestion arises that if the Olbian busts were not used for incense burning, then they could have had another cultic function, such as a receptacle for scented oil that could have been poured into the open cup of a bust Thymiaterian to perfume the air for an extended period. Even though the female bust was made in a mold, the Thymiaterian cup was always, usually, say, in Pontic region, a simple structure added by hand. You can compare it to this example, for example, but the important thing for me is that this is one of the first Thymiateria used in Olbia Pontica. It was imported, and its cup was made in a mold, and you can clearly see some petals here. So it was in the shape of the flower, but the Thymiateria produced later were a bit simplified, though having these Dionysiac symbols on the heads. So these new cups were contrasted, actually, and these cups contrasted with the plastically elaborated female figure. This distinguishes the Thymiateria of our region from their South Italian. Quite different and quite various were also not only the cups, as you can see them there, sometimes very simply made. I just want to be sure if you can see this cup. Can you? It's only close to my computer. Can anyone see this corner of the screen?
Yes, we can.
Yes. Thank you. If you want, you can put on your videos just for me to understand you're here and I'm still heard. So it was maybe important for me to show this cup as well. These ones at the bottom of the screen were made by hand in various ways, and they illustrate clearly this spontaneously, I would say, in producing new bust Thymiateria, because there were some serially produced types, and there were some terracottas which were just changed at the spur of the moment using different parts. And for example, this is a part of the Stephana, which was also made by hand in some examples. So this is how we can feel this demand, say, this need of those types of Thymiateria in a very short period, right? So the depictions which were under those cups, right here we have those lots of terracottas have the cups broken off. And if you look inside, you would see the stem of this cup. So they were attached to the raw clay later, and they were made from separate pieces of clay. But still, as you see, they were produced in almost the same appearance in different cities, on Western Pontic, on Northern Pontic, in different cities of the region. And this is actually interesting for us. So the females, right? They were different, they were various, right? Those wearing a Stephane repeat the iconographic scheme of the large half figure that you can see here. The height of it is about 70 centimeters, which is quite a lot for terracotta images. And it was produced at Olbia, as well as it was produced, how to say, on the appearance of the marble sculpture, on the appearance of the types of various goddesses, I would say. The female depicted in these large terracottas has been interpreted as Cora Persephone. I'm saying about several terracottas. We have one preserved fully, and there are some fragments which are completely equal till the details. You can see some ribbons here made by hand, Stephane made by hand. So the technique of their making and their shape and the clay are completely equal, and the earrings very nice, combined of two handmade details. So they were equal in shape. So there were a couple of them, say we know a couple of them in Olbia. And having them as an example, the whole series of Thymiateria were produced. They are, as you see, lesser in size, right? And they were used as Thymiateria, actually. So the female has been interpreted as Cora Persephone due to the lack of the attributes that could associate her with any other mythological female. She has been viewed as emerging from the ground because of her, let's see, because of her abbreviated representation till the waist, right? However, many other female busts from Hellenistic period with undisputed attributes have no relation to Cora Persephone. In my view, the impetus for creating only half of a figure was more of an issue of functioning and convenience, right? During the course of the iconographic development of Hellenistic period, terracottas in this period were had the increasing, or actually showed the increasing interest in large-scale imagery and the corresponding greater attention to decoration and details, which we mentioned already. Figures were becoming larger, the walls were becoming thicker, as you can see here, right? And the decorative elements even heavier. Consequently, full-size depictions of a human figure that could be mass-produced by means of a mold would have been too heavy and unwieldy for a purchaser to acquire and use. Half figures having larger depictions of faces and occasionally hands, as well as attributes, would have been more valued, as well as more convenient for the offering table or any other horizontal surface. Their walls are thick and the base and smoothly cut below, technical features that facilitate actual stability. Here we can see some more fragmented or fragments also of half figures, right? Considering all these observations, we can say that there is no direct evidence testifying to the fact that the large Olbian half figures depicted Cora Persephone, since their clothing and headdress, like here, right, were usual for any female representation. Perhaps their identification can be indirectly defined by their co-finds. Certain peculiarities of half figures that are so close to the fragmented bust Thymiateria from Olbia suggest that the smaller versions imitated the larger half figures. The author of the fragment Thymiateria copied actually every detail: the hairstyle, the clothing, figural proportions, and pose. Different are only those elements that required more effort in workmanship. The half-figure concept was abbreviated to a bust, like this. Now let's see another one. Yeah, let's see another one. So to a bust, to avoid protruding hands with its necessity for formal mouths. I mean, to make those each each hand, the extra mouths were needed, right? And these busts were not ornamented with thin ribbons hanging from the stephane or with cone-shaped pendant earrings. And finally, a wide hole in the top of the head of the half figures that is framed by a separately mounted decoration is replaced by just by a handmade cup, which is clearly can be seen from the top over there, right? In this way, a series of busts was produced, of which fragments, at least 9 examples, have been brought to light. After casting, the coroplast added only a low stephane and globular earrings. So I'm just taking your attention on those technological details to trace the producing and to trace actually the course of this producing, right? Because I always ask myself about the purpose of the different parts of terracottas. Of course, we know that there are some technical openings to make the air come out during the burning up of the ceramic products. But there is a hole in the top of this big bust, right? Big half figure. A comparison of the terracotta half figure with the busts being discussed gives rise to a consideration of its structure within the context of its function during the religious practice. It may be that a high support could have been placed through the wide opening at the bottom of the half figure, while a Thymiaterian cup could have been placed on its head. Then the turn to simpler Thymiateria with added cups, having a morphology popular in Greece of that period, seems to have been a logical step forward. 2 forms were used to produce a wall series of busts depicting this woman in stephane. And it should be noted that they have their analogies in many cities of the Pontic region. Many of those fragments were found in Botros, situated at the central terminus at Olbia. And together with the Thymiateria showing Aphrodite were found, like this one, for example. The wholly preserved Thymiateria of Aphrodite, which is now stored in the State Hermitage, was found in north part of Olbia. And what we have in this Botros, which was continuously used, it is only the fragments of them, right? But still you can see arrows here. You can see the smiling face. Of course, it is just different on pictures, but when you see them put in a row, the features of face are completely similar. So it is interesting how they were used. Not only, I mean, the features of the face were used not only on the bust Thymiateria, but also on the protoma and in some other terracottas, and in some busts like this one. So if you compare the face, it just have the same face, which was maybe just popular, or maybe just copying some very special image, right? So my point was to emphasize that in the same context, the bust Thymiateria depicting Aphrodite and depicting just female without any attributes were found together. And the question arises whether the images of the not identified figures were simplified images of this Aphrodite. In the course of times, depictions of bust Thymiateria in Olbia appear to have become simpler and more schematic and less, reminiscent actually of Italian patterns. Here we have Aphrodite, for example, with schematized arrows just ahead of him, and the wings in form of petals, right? And here, for example, Yeah, some fragments I was talking about, right? Lots of fragments of these cups. And here some pictures of those eruses on both sides of shoulders. Some petals here, the faces again equal, and again all of them have these cups mounted atop, or just, let us see here, or just holes from those cups. And as for the face, you can see it's just very similar on the protoma, one-sided, and on half figures. So this face was just doubled in by a single choroplastic workshop. However, the simplification of the images on the forms never affected the general appearance of the Thymiateria. They still preserved the shape of busts and never resembled to the heads alone, as was the case of Italy. Peculiar for Olbia was the usage of botry in the cult of Aphrodite. And as I've said, the finds of her images in the botros are recorded in a temenos, but not only one. In each temena, the central and the southern ones, discovered not recently, say. Each botros was filled up with relics from cultic practices and old votives, as they were not allowed to be taken away from the sacral precincts. In addition, these structures were further used as a primitive altars for making offerings and libations. Some of the botry were arranged in disused cisterns, and some of them contained images of other popular gods of Hellenistic period. Such bath Thymiateria show actually another peculiarity of the worship of Aphrodite in this period. The diffusion of incense in cult activity, which was, as I've said, was not discussed till recently. The bath Thymiateria of similar types demonstrate that cultural and religious activity devoted to Aphrodite had much in common in many ancient Greek cities around the Black Sea. So Aphrodite with her sons Eros and Himeros on her shoulders, one of the say most spread types of those images with cups, right? It is known in North Pontic Tauric Chersonesus as well, in Nymphaeum, and of course on protomaya from Calatis and from Olbia, and in jewelry. And actually, usually mostly published from the sites at the Bosporan Kingdom, right? In Olbia, the third of all known bath Thymiateria showed Aphrodite. Another third part depicted the goddess without any attributes, and the other one was a participant of the Dionysiac cult. Therefore, actually the participant of the Dionysiac cult, as I've said, sometimes attributed as Ariadne, associated with Aphrodite. So the images which were without attributes, especially those with attention stressed on adornments, on decoration, might be also related to the Aphrodite cult. Found at the areas of house shrines of temenoi, they corresponded to the public and to family worship of the goddess. And Dionysus, right, the next one, Dionysus. Here again, we have the broken away cups. So they are the traces of them, and we can see, if you like would look at this terracotta from inside, you would see the stems inside from the cups which were put atop into the holes, and of course some fragments of them, right? I tried to put them on this reconstruction. Some of them have some paints on them. They were found in various places at the city. and they have their direct analogies in the in other parts of the Pontic region. As for the paints, there was another reconstruction. Actually, I tried to find very similar colors which would correspond to those traces of paints. So we don't know the colors of the rest, but we know the color of the hair and everything you see here. Very bright heat tone, so it must be look it must look very nice, I suppose. And as I've said, similarly made by Thymiateria are known in North Pontic, Tauric Chersonesus, in Nymphaeum at Hermonassa. Another one is known in Propontic region. Some personages of Dionysiac cult are known in Odessos and Gordion. And let me show you this only, I would say, Thymiaterion, which was found on the necropolis. I don't know exactly if it was found in a tomb or it was found just on the layer, or so it was, if it was used after the I mean, in some commemorative cults, or if it was, so we just don't know. But all of other Thymiateria were found, at least of those that we know, were found at the territory of the cities, of the territory of Horus, in house shrines, in public territories, but not at the necropolis. And of course, in addition to those serially produced terracottas, one more thing about, just to just not forget, here we have also a protrusion from the cup. And it was interesting for me to find out in the literature, as it was called the Demeter first, then in another a bit later book it was called Demeter with a question mark, and then actually we have this preposition, right, supposition that it was a Thymiaterian of a Dionysiac personages, as soon as it has the verse made of leaves and especially those corums, right, and corums and fruits of ivy. So of course I'm aware that not all of the Thymiateria are published by now, and I already found most of them after my first publication, because the researchers were like how to say, turn in sometimes to me if it is the same. So new material appeared only after the first publication, so I would say, which is good. And if you would have any other suggestions and any other materials which are not available for me, sometimes they just not publish it, or publish it without any details. We don't even know what was the purpose of this terracotta. For example, if we have only the frontal image of the terracotta, we don't know what was upstairs, inside, etc., and we don't know the way it was used actually. So in addition to these serially produced terracottas, there are single depictions, right, of other personages, not Aphrodite or Dionysus, right, and with Thymiateria on their heads. They are heads broken from busts presenting the mother of the gods, for example, on which the polos is transformed into a thymiam container. Here it was made by hand with some traces on soot on it, and it was one of the earliest examples of such usage. And another bust was quite deliberately changed during the process of its making. And it was noting that it is not known actually what could have been affixed to the openings which we have here. They were made on the opposite sides, right? Although it is clear that they could not have been for suspension, since the figure would have been too heavy for hanging. It can only be assumed that such elements were a part of the Thymiaterion and were intended as supports for elements made of organic materials which have not preserved. The headdress of this mother of the gods, Thymiaterion, is also known in Hellenistic Troy, as well as at other Hellenistic sites. Busts with a Thymiaterion cup in the form of a polos are common for this goddess, as we can see in Apulia. So the Olbian finds and the finds from Dionysus Hora are not exclusive. And these figurines represent the period before the widespread of bust Thymiateria in Pontic region. So we can see some searches for some most needed, right, most useful image, right. There are also some unique Thymiateria of the region which were used after the time of the serial production. It is the 2nd century BC. Sometimes they were produced in processed casts, initially made for production of other types of terracottas. Especially interesting is this one, which is made of the mold, which purpose was to make the Tanagra style figurines. And the Coroplast didn't have actually the mold for the back, so he made it by hand, really roughly, and added it here. So just to have this shape of rounded figure of the Thymiaterion, and the cup is broken here. And another one again was very smooth, not smooth, but actually very heavily used cast, and some ribs were made here by hand just to have this to renew this appearance of hair, and again handmade bag and the hole from the cup, right? So heavily worn molds were used, and not quite clear images were received, but that was compensated very often by painted details. New images did not have definite attributes helping to identify which deity was worshipped with help of this Thymiateria. Such terracottas perhaps were related with customary cults in honor of the goddess, which was anyway known for everyone without any attributes needed. So the more traditional Thymiateria types from Olbia represent a female wearing Stephane, a Dionysiac personage, and Aphrodite. And it is interesting that in South Italy, where Thymiateria were widely used, one finds examples interpreted as participants in the theos, the same Dionysiac thiasos and the same Aphrodite. In Myrina and Argos in Asia Minor, these have been viewed as fertility goddesses, such as Demeter, or another, not typical image was Isis from Amisos. But it is likely that the tradition of Thymiateria usage and production came to North Pontic cities from Asia Minor Greek centers, whose products influences the Coroplasts in the Hellenistic period. While the concept of the Thymiaterion was borrowed, it also was changed by local taste and religious practice, so that a new form of sculptural expression came into being. Most of the Thymiateria fragments come from the excavations of dwelling houses, actually, and from the public sanctuary. In two cases, they are found in two cases from houses, they are found two at one building, two at one context. They are very often discovered together with other terracottas. And if you look at what those what the images of those terracottas, they will show us the same circle of gods, the mother of the gods and Aphrodite and Dionysus. Very often they are found with relief cups, and in 3 cases with a lamp. So we received the same circle actually of cults in which the Thymiateria were used. A suggestion comes into focus that the busts with cup Thymiateria from Olbia Pontica were used in household cults for the worship of Dionysus and the mother of the gods, and very possibly for other goddesses as well. And I would suggest that aromatic oil were placed in the cups on the heads of these divinities, oils that were intended for a less active and less intense circulation of scents that occurs with help of burning. Offering could look like putting the fruits or corns atop, right? And here we can see some other devices used for as a incense burner and as actually Thymiateria without any traces of soot again. So it could be that some small fruits could be put, or some corns could be put, or some valuable liquid could be poured into them, like blood, oil, wine, or some incense. And additional ritual terracottas themselves could be offered to the deities, thus becoming the votives. As far as sacrifices were not practiced in cult of Aphrodite, flowers, doves, figurines with females were widely used. And what's important that the rapid spread of censors in a certain period probably corresponded to the changes in ritual practices in which such devices were needed. Such terracotta busts were most widely used in Pontic region in the first half of the 3rd century BC, with the latest examples dated to the 2nd century BC. As soon as the choroplastic workshops in Pontic region were often situated within the sacral precincts, it could be influential sanctuaries which caused such changes in the religious life of Pontic cities. It was not only availability of choroplastic workshops that caused the fact that ancient Greeks in Pontic region shared those similar rites and devices for their performing. The thing was also in common beliefs shared by the Hellenes. So these are the thoughts about these materials. Thank you for your attention. Last slide.